Good morning to everybody. Dear students, we are going through the poem To the Food from Its Child, written by Pablo Neruda. I've already explained some of the lines written by Neruda. Continuing the poem, before that, I will read the lines first. These soft nails of cords bunched together grow hard and change themselves into opaque substance, hard as horn, and the tiny petaled toes of the child grow bunched and out of trim, take on the form of iris reptiles with triangular heads like worms. Later, they grow calloused and are covered with the faint volcanoes of death, a coarsening hard to accept. Let us see. Having the repetition of the previous few lines, explanation, as the foot, I have already told you, is enclosed in the darkness of the shoe, it can only feel hardships a man has to face to survive in this harsh world. It is also unable to see, like a blind man, the other foot on a man's leg. Then age starts catching up with the foot. There's the child grows into a young man, then he grows old and feeble. Feeble means weak or dull. The foot which is enclosed in the darkness of the shoe also grows old. The soft nails of the baby foot, like a petaled toes, harder and change themselves into opaque substance, hard as horn. The tiny petaled toes of the child grow bunched and out of trim. They begin to look like eyeless reptiles. See, the nails of or the toes of the child are very soft and of cords. What this cords means? The very smooth and delicate and transparent. Just touch the toes or the nails of a baby foot. You can have the experience of delicateness or smoothness about those nails and toes. In other words, the toes of the baby are like petaled toes, that is, like a flower leaf, very delicate and very smooth. And as the child grows, the nails are bunched out of trim. That means gradually his innocence destructs and the soft emotions go on decreasing, which results into harnish or rudeness. This is what has been said in the few next lines. Soft nails of cords, tiny petaled toes of the child. What will happen to these soft nails and toes of the child? The nails which are transparent become opaque substance. And nails which are transparent become opaque and hard as the horns of animals. Opaque means not transparent. A tiny petal toes grow bunched out of trim like reptiles which don't have eyes and like worms. Neruda effectively uses the imagery of eyeless reptiles to describe the changes that the foot gets. Eyeless reptile here means crawling creature like a snake, for example. This eyeless reptile doesn't see or understands who is friend or foe. So, in other words, We can explain in this way. The man, instead of evolving as a man, he slips to the level of reptiles. That too, a reptile which doesn't have eyes. And after this, the skin becomes so hard or rough like faint volcanoes of death. That means the individual loses his soft feelings. Yet, as the social system wishes, the traveling goes on without rest, without stoppage, without any aim. Life goes on. In other words, later, as the young foot grows older, they grow calloused. Callous means insensitive, hardened, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬಿರುಸಾದ ಅಥವಾ ದಯಾದಾಕ್ಷಿಣ್ಯ with merciless, we can say the meaning for this word. They become rough and are covered with scars of the injuries which occurred during the man's struggle to survive in this world. But this change is harder to accept. What Neruda says, a coarsening harder to accept with the faint volcanoes of death, the coarsening hard to accept. It is hard to accept for the child or the foot, but it has to accept. Here, the poet attempts to know that as the child grows into an adult, it becomes less open to reality. It also means that people grow harder both physically and emotionally. The phrase that is faint volcanoes of death here suggests that the food comes to appreciate mortality. Then what all these lines says that the growing of the children becomes, the child becomes aware of the reality. When it was in shoe, it dreams to be a butterfly or an apple. Now it is not so. It was very soft, like a petal toes. Now the nails are bunched together, out of trim, as Neruda says here. So it comes out from dream to reality. Gradually, it understands what the real life is. And it has to accept the battle. It has to accept the challenge. What Neruda says in first few lines, stones, bits of glass, streets, and rough path in the earth. All these has to accept. That means the hindrances or the problems or the challenges, it has to accept. Because there is no alternative. To lead his life, to lead his or her life, he or she has to accept the problems or the difficulties which it has to face in its future life. Then, as gradually it increases, it knows the reality of life, and even though, as Neruda says, with the faint volcanoes of death, a coarsening hard to accept. Later they grow calloused. It has, though it is hard to accept, of course it is hard to accept for that foot or the child, but it has to, it must accept the challenges. Or what are these challenges? What are these hindrances? Or what are the difficulties for the child? Either it may be restrictions imposed by the society, or the norms, or the rules and regulations, or the laws of the locality. The child has to live in this environment. It has to accept all these. It should not be out of this world, because the child or a human being or an individual who lives in the society is not a Robin Hood or an Himalayan saint. We have to live in the society. So This what Neruda says. Neruda says, for in these few lines. Next lines we will take in the next class. Thank you very much.